This is happening right now in Jerusalem. The streets went silent. People left their work and looked up at the sky. Even reporters had no words. And when I tell you why, you'll understand what's truly unfolding. The mainstream media isn't covering this. They don't want you to see what's really happening, but the truth can't stay hidden forever. You're watching this because God wanted you to see it. Something in your spirit recognizes this moment as different. The ancient stones of the old city shimmered under the morning sun. The dome of the rock glowed gold beneath a clear sky. Synagogues, churches, and mosques all stood in silence. The same soil where prophets walked, the same streets that heard the Messiah's footsteps. It began at 4:47 a.m. Jerusalem time, before the first call to prayer, before the morning bells, before the first tourist stepped onto the cobblestones. The watchman on the walls heard it first, a sound that wasn't quite thunder, wasn't quite music, but something that made every heart in the city stop beating for just one moment. Samuel Goldstein, a security guard at the Western Wall, was making his routine patrol when the sound reached him. "I've worked these walls for 15 years, he later told me, his voice still trembling. "I know every sound this city makes. This wasn't of this world. It was like the very stones were singing." The sound lasted exactly 7 seconds, 7 seconds that changed everything. Within minutes, something unprecedented began to happen. People emerged from their homes, not in panic, but drawn by something they couldn't name. Orthodox Jews stepped out of study halls. Muslim families paused their morning preparations. Christian pilgrims left their hostels, all moving toward the Temple Mount. Rabbi David Cohen, who had been studying in the Herva synagogue, said he felt a pull in his spirit, unlike anything in 40 years of serving God. A young mother from Bethany, Sarah Ibrahim, described feeling as if her heart was being called home. Father Michael O'Brien, visiting from Ireland, spoke of the most profound peace descending like a gentle rain. They heard a sound, not thunder, but a voice within the storm. Thousands ran, not from fear, but because something was calling them. An old merchant said, "I've waited my entire life for this." A pilgrim from Australia said, "I felt the heavens touch the earth." This isn't hysteria, this is prophecy in motion. What the prophets saw thousands of years ago is unfolding before our eyes. The prophet Joel spoke of this moment. "Blow the trumpet in Zion, sound the alarm on my holy hill. Let all who live in the land tremble, for the day of the Lord is coming." And from the book of Acts, when this sound was heard, a crowd came together in bewilderment, because each one heard their own language being spoken. My friend, can you feel this in your spirit? Do you realize we are witnessing what generations only dreamed of? God is moving the pieces of the end times. The veil between heaven and earth is getting thinner. This is the preview of the greatest event in human history. By sunrise, over 3,000 people had gathered at the base of the Temple Mount. Jews, Christians, Muslims, tourists, locals, all standing together in a silence more profound than any prayer. They didn't know why they had come. They only knew they had to be there. But this was only the beginning. What happened as the sun crested the Mount of Olives would leave no doubt that we are living in the last chapter of human history as we know it. Today, something impossible appeared over the Temple Mount. The gathering crowd stood in perfect silence as the first rays of dawn painted the golden dome. Then, at exactly 6:12 a.m., the impossible became visible. A pillar of light, soft as morning mist but brilliant as crystal, descended from the clear sky directly above the ancient stones. Not harsh, not blinding, but undeniably supernatural. Those who witnessed it say the light seemed to contain every color that ever existed, yet appeared as pure white. Dr. Elena Vasquez, a quantum physicist from Madrid who was visiting Jerusalem, tried to explain what she saw. "I study light for a living. I understand photons and wavelengths and electromagnetic radiation. What I witnessed defies every law of physics I know. This light had no source, cast no shadows, and somehow made everyone it touched feel complete. The light descended slowly, taking nearly 10 minutes to reach the ground. As it moved, those watching felt an overwhelming sense of peace wash over them. Enemies embraced. Strangers wept together. Children laughed with pure joy. Maria Santos, a young nurse from the Philippines, described the moment the light touched her. I felt like I was being seen, really seen, for the first time in my life. Every hurt, every fear, every doubt just melted away. I understood why I was born, why I was there in that moment. But this wasn't just some emotional experience or mass hallucination. The light was witnessed by security cameras, recorded by dozens of phones, and seen by thousands of people from different cultures, religions, and backgrounds. They all described the same phenomenon, a gentle, all-encompassing light that seemed to communicate without words. The pillar of light remained visible for exactly 40 minutes. During this time, something unprecedented happened in Jerusalem's recorded history. Crime stopped. Emergency services received no calls. The usually bustling city fell into a reverent hush that could be felt for miles around. Rabbi Miriam Levy, who had rushed to the scene when word spread through the Orthodox community, spoke through tears. In our tradition, we speak of the Shekinah, the divine presence that once filled the temple. Today, I felt it return, not just to the Temple Mount, but to the hearts of everyone present. This isn't coincidence. This is prophecy in motion. The prophet Zechariah spoke of this day. On that day living water will flow out from Jerusalem, half of it east to the Dead Sea, and half of it west to the Mediterranean Sea, in summer and in winter. And Jesus himself said, Jerusalem will be trampled on by the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. But perhaps most significant was what happened to the ancient stones themselves. Witnesses report that the massive blocks of the Western Wall began to emit a soft, golden glow. The stones, worn smooth by centuries of prayers and tears, seemed to pulse with an inner light that grew stronger as the pillar above grew brighter. Imam Hassan al-Rashid, who had served at the Al-Aqsa Mosque for over 20 years, found himself standing alongside Jewish and Christian believers, all witnessing the same miracle. Allah shows his signs to whom he wills. Today, the stones themselves testified to his presence. The light began to fade as the sun reached its full strength, but those present say they could still feel its warmth hours later. As the pillar slowly ascended back into the clear sky, it left behind something that changed everything. Not just the marks on the ancient stones, but a mark on every soul that witnessed it. Now that you know this, what will you do about it? Are you ready for what comes next? While the world sleeps, God is calling those who are awake. The light may have ascended, but its effect on Jerusalem was only beginning. What happened next would prove that this was not an ending, but an announcement of something far greater coming. Jerusalem stopped this morning for a reason no one can explain. Word of the morning's events spread through the city like ripples on still water. But this wasn't ordinary news. This was testimony. Those who had witnessed the light couldn't stop speaking about it. Their faces glowed with an inner peace that was impossible to ignore. Sarah Cohen, a hotel manager in the Jewish quarter, found herself embracing guests she had never met before. I couldn't explain what had happened to me, she said, but every person I encountered, I felt this overwhelming love for them. It was like seeing everyone as family. The transformation was immediate and undeniable. Jerusalem, a city historically divided by walls, both physical and spiritual, began to experience something unprecedented: unity. In the Christian quarter, Father Antonio Ricci opened the doors of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre wide and declared that all were welcome to pray. Today, I understood that God's house has no walls. he announced to the growing crowd. One, every soul that seeks him is home here. At the Western Wall, Rabbi Solomon Goldberg found himself in conversation with Dr. Ahmed Hassan, a Muslim scholar from Gaza. They had been on opposite sides of theological debates for decades, but now they stood side by side, both describing the same spiritual encounter. "We felt the presence of the Almighty," Rabbi Goldberg explained to the gathering crowd. "Not as Jews or Muslims or Christians, but as children of Abraham, children of the Most High God." The ripple effect continued throughout the day. Street vendors gave away their goods freely. Taxi drivers refused payment from pilgrims. Hotel owners opened their doors to anyone seeking shelter. The normal commerce of the ancient city transformed into an economy of grace. But perhaps most remarkable was what happened in the hospitals. Dr. Rachel Stein, head of emergency medicine at Hadassah Medical Center, reported something she had never seen in 20 years of practice. Patients began healing faster. Not just physical healing, but emotional and spiritual restoration. Cancer patients sang in their rooms. Accident victims forgave those who had hurt them. It was as if hope itself had become medicine. This isn't mass hysteria. This is prophecy being fulfilled before our eyes. The prophet Isaiah wrote, "Many peoples will come and say, 'Come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the temple of the God of Jacob. He will teach us his ways, so that we may walk in his paths.'" And in the New Testament, Acts records, all the believers were one in heart and mind. No one claimed that any of their possessions was their own, but they shared everything they had. As evening approached, something even more extraordinary began to happen. People who had returned to their homes and hotels found they couldn't sleep, not from anxiety or excitement, but from an overwhelming desire to pray, to worship, to give thanks. Young David Rosenberg, a student at Hebrew University, described the experience. "I felt this pull to pray like I've never felt before, but not just for myself, for the whole world. I found myself weeping for people I'd never met, in countries I'd never visited, asking God to pour out this same peace everywhere." Throughout the night, small groups gathered in homes, on rooftops, in courtyards. Jews, Christians and Muslims found themselves praying together in ways they never had before. Language barriers seemed to disappear. Doctrinal differences felt insignificant. There was only one desire, to thank God for what they had witnessed. Maria Gonzalez, a Catholic pilgrim from Mexico, found herself in a Jerusalem apartment with an Orthodox Jewish family and a Palestinian Christian couple. "We didn't share the same language or the same religious practices," she recalled, "but we shared the same spirit. We prayed in Hebrew, Arabic, Spanish, and English, and somehow we all understood every word." The authorities tried to make sense of what was happening. The mayor called for calm, though there was no disorder. The police prepared for crowds, though the people were the most peaceful they had ever seen. News crews arrived from around the world, but found that their cameras couldn't capture what was truly taking place. The transformation of human hearts. My friend, can you feel this in your spirit? Do you realize we are witnessing what generations only dreamed of? God is moving the pieces of the end times. The veil between heaven and earth is getting thinner. As the second night fell over Jerusalem, those who had experienced the light began to understand that they had been chosen for more than just witnessing. They had been prepared for something greater. The light that had touched the Temple Mount was spreading, not just through the city, but through every heart that was open to receive it. What happened today stopped a city, but what's coming will stop the entire world. This is happening right now in Jerusalem. As the third day dawned over the holy city, those who had experienced the light began to understand that they hadn't just witnessed a miracle, they had received a message, not in words, but in the language of the Spirit that transcends all earthly tongues. The revelation came gradually, like sunrise over the Mount of Olives. Those who had been touched by the light found themselves speaking words they hadn't planned, knowing things they hadn't learned, understanding prophecies that had been sealed for generations. Anna Petrov, a Russian Orthodox believer who had saved for years to make this pilgrimage, stood at the Western Wall and began to speak in perfect Hebrew, a language she had never studied. The words that came from her mouth were from the book of Daniel. "At that time Michael, the great prince who protects your people, will arise. There will be a time of distress, such as has not happened from the beginning of nations until then. But at that time your people, everyone whose name is found written in the book, will be delivered." The crowd that had gathered around her gasped, not just at the miraculous nature of her speaking Hebrew, but at the way the ancient words seemed to pulse with new life and meaning. Rabbi Jonathan Levy, who had been studying scripture for 40 years, found himself understanding passages that had always been mysteries. The prophecies are converging, he told the growing assembly. Ezekiel, Daniel, Zechariah, Revelation, they're all speaking of this time, this moment, this generation. But it wasn't just the religious leaders who were receiving revelation. Simple believers, children, visitors who had never opened a Bible in their lives were suddenly speaking words of prophecy and hope. 8-year-old Joshua Kim, visiting with his family from South Korea, tugged on his mother's sleeve and said in perfect English, "Mommy, the angels are getting ready. They're putting on their armor. Jesus is coming soon." His mother later explained that Joshua spoke no English and had no theological training, yet his words carried a weight that silenced the adults around him. This isn't hysteria, this is prophecy in motion. What the prophet saw thousands of years ago is unfolding before our eyes. Joel prophesied, "And afterward, I will pour out my spirit on all people. Your sons and daughters will prophesy. Your old men will dream dreams. Your young men will see visions." Throughout the third day, the messages became clearer and more unified. Though they came through dozens of different people from different cultures and backgrounds, they all pointed to the same truth. The time of waiting was ending. The promises made to Abraham, Moses, David, and the apostles were about to be fulfilled. Dr. Catherine Williams, a biblical scholar from Oxford who had come to study ancient manuscripts, found herself weeping as the meaning of centuries of prophecy became crystal clear. "I've spent my entire career analyzing these texts academically. Today, they became alive. I understand now that we haven't been studying history. We've been studying the blueprint for right now." The message wasn't one of fear or judgment, but of preparation and hope. Those who received it spoke of an overwhelming love, God's love for His creation and His desire for every person to experience the light they had witnessed in Jerusalem. Father James Murphy, a priest from Ireland, found himself speaking to a crowd that had gathered in the Christian quarter. The light we saw wasn't just for Jerusalem. It was a preview, a sample, a promise. God is preparing to pour out His Spirit on all flesh, just as He promised. The light that touched the Temple Mount is going to cover the earth like waters cover the sea. As word spread through social media and news outlets, something unprecedented began happening around the world. People who had never been to Jerusalem, who hadn't witnessed the light, began reporting their own experiences of supernatural peace and spiritual awakening. In Tokyo, a businessman paused during his morning commute and began weeping for reasons he couldn't explain, then felt compelled to call his estranged father and ask for forgiveness. In Sao Paulo, a street child found a wallet full of money and waited 3 hours to return it to its owner. In London, enemies in a family feud embraced and forgave decades of bitterness. The light that had appeared over Jerusalem was somehow spreading across the globe, one heart at a time. Pastor Michael Thompson, who had flown from Atlanta when he heard the news, stood before a crowd that included people from 6 continents. "Friends, what we're witnessing isn't just a miracle in Jerusalem. It's the beginning of the greatest spiritual awakening in human history. The light that touched this holy ground is the same light that wants to touch every heart, every life, every nation. My friend, can you feel this in your spirit? Do you realize we are witnessing what generations only dreamed of? God is moving the pieces of the end times. The veil between heaven and earth is getting thinner. This is the preview of the greatest event in human history. As the third day ended, those who had received the message understood their calling. They weren't meant to keep what they had experienced to themselves. They were meant to be messengers, carriers of the light, preparing the way for something even greater. Now that you know this, what will you do about it? Are you ready for what comes next? While the world sleeps, God is calling those who are awake. Today, something impossible appeared over the Temple Mount. As the fourth day began in Jerusalem, those who had experienced the light understood their mission. They were no longer just witnesses. They were ambassadors of hope, carriers of a message that the world desperately needed to hear. The transformation was complete and undeniable. Jerusalem had become a launching point for the greatest spiritual awakening in human history. Teams of believers began forming organically, not through human organization, but through divine orchestration. A Jewish businessman from New York found himself partnered with a Muslim teacher from Morocco and a Christian farmer from Brazil. They didn't speak the same language, but they shared the same calling. It was like we had always known each other, explained Rebecca Thompson, a nurse from Texas who found herself leading a group of 12 people from 9 different countries. God matched us perfectly. Our gifts, our languages, our destinations. We knew without being told where we were supposed to go. The first teams left Jerusalem on the 5th day, carrying nothing but the fire in their hearts and the certainty that God would provide. They traveled to the ends of the earth, to the favelas of Rio, the townships of Johannesburg, the villages of rural India, the boardrooms of Hong Kong, the refugee camps of Syria. And wherever they went, the light followed. Marcus Silva, a former gang member from São Paulo who had been in Jerusalem visiting his sister, returned to Brazil with a message of hope for his former associates. Within hours of his arrival, 3 of the most feared gang leaders in the city had broken down in tears and asked for prayer. The same spirit that touched Jerusalem touched their hearts. Marcus testified, they felt the love of God for the first time in their lives. Dr. Fatima al-Zahra, a physician from Baghdad, carried the message to refugee camps across the Middle East. In places where despair had reigned for decades, hope began to bloom. I brought no medicine, she said, but I brought the great physician. Everywhere I shared what I had experienced in Jerusalem, people began to heal, not just their bodies, but their souls. The awakening spread faster than any news report could follow. Social media couldn't contain it. Television networks couldn't explain it. Governments couldn't control it. It was a move of God that transcended every human system and boundary. In Moscow, an oligarch sold his mansion and used the money to build orphanages. In Tokyo, the suicide rate dropped to 0 for 3 consecutive weeks. In London, the crime rate fell by 90%. In New York, Wall Street traders began giving away their bonuses to homeless shelters. This isn't coincidence. This is prophecy being fulfilled before our eyes. Jesus said, "And this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in the whole world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come." The prophet Habakkuk declared, "For the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord as the waters cover the sea." But perhaps most significantly, the message carriers began reporting the same vision, the same revelation, no matter where they were in the world. They spoke of a great gathering coming, a moment when the light that had appeared over Jerusalem would return, not just to one city, but to the entire earth. Pastor David Kim, who had carried the message to underground churches in North Korea, sent word back to Jerusalem. The believers here weep with joy. They say their grandparents always told them that God would remember his people in the darkest hour. They can feel it coming, the great deliverance. Sister Mary Catherine, who had taken the message to the slums of Calcutta, reported through tears, "The poorest of the poor are singing songs of praise. Children who have never had enough to eat are declaring that their Heavenly Father will provide. They speak of a great feast coming, where every tear will be wiped away." Dr. James Robertson, who had shared the testimony in the universities of Europe, found that students who had been the most hardened skeptics were the most receptive to the message. They're hungry for truth in a way I've never seen. When they hear about the light over Jerusalem, something in their spirits recognizes it as what they've been searching for all their lives. As reports flooded back to Jerusalem from around the world, those who remained in the holy city began to understand the magnitude of what was happening. This wasn't just a revival or an awakening. This was the preparation for the return of the King. Rabbi David Cohen, who had witnessed the original light, stood before a crowd of thousands who had gathered for evening prayers. "My friends, what began here in Jerusalem is now circling the globe. We are living in the days the prophets longed to see. The light that touched our ancient stones is preparing to touch every nation, every tribe, every tongue. The messages from around the world all pointed to the same truth. Something greater was coming." The light over Jerusalem had been the announcement, the preparation, the first trumpet call, but the symphony was far from over. My friend, can you feel this in your spirit? Do you realize we are witnessing what generations only dreamed of? God is moving the pieces of the end times. The veil between heaven and earth is getting thinner. This is the preview of the greatest event in human history. As the sun set on the seventh day since the light had first appeared over Jerusalem, those who had been chosen as messengers received their final instruction, not in words, but in the same spiritual language that had been speaking to their hearts all week. The time was coming when they would be called home, not just to Jerusalem, but to the source of the light itself. The great gathering was approaching. The wedding feast was being prepared. The bridegroom was coming for his bride. Now that you know this, what will you do about it? Are you ready for what comes next? While the world sleeps, God is calling those who are awake. What happened today stopped a city, but what's coming will stop the entire world. The trumpets have echoed once. Soon they will sound again, and when they do, every knee will bow and every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is Lord. The light over Jerusalem was just the beginning. The best is yet to come. Until then, stay ready, stay faithful. Maranatha, come, Lord Jesus.